This is my last video in Los Angeles for a while. I am flying to London. So if you know anybody that has a super cool car that I can do a feature on in and around London over the next week, hit me up on Instagram. It's right here on screen. My friend 802 Garage sent me this link to this Motor Authority article on the C8 Corvette. And by the way, I'm gonna be at the launch, the reveal of the C8 on July 18th, and I'm gonna have a video up on the 19th. So if you wanna see that, go ahead and hit subscribe. Jim Mero was a ride and handling engineer for the Corvette for 34 years, and he retired just last September in 2018. Now he's the subject of this article, and he said that he was part of the C8 development team and that he worked on the C7 ZR1 and developed the magnetic ride calibration for all of the 2014 to all of the 2017 Corvettes. So he is a ride and handling specialist. He's also an excellent driver. Apparently he's got about 15,000 miles of track driving, he says. And in 2012 in the C6 and the Z06 C6 Corvette, he put down a time at the Nürburgring of 7:22. So he now owns a company called Jim Mero Vehicle Dynamics, and he sells suspension calibration software for your magnetic ride control Corvettes. So I think Jim's a pretty qualified guy. And so he was on a podcast recently called the Overcast Podcast. And in that podcast, he said, I worry about the mid-engine Corvette. And I think he was referring to handling. Now, full disclosure, I haven't actually had time to listen to the full podcast because I'm hopping on a plane in the morning, but I'm going with what the Motor Authority article said. Now he said that General Motors also benchmarked a couple different cars for ride and handling, namely the Audi R8, the Ferrari 458, the 911, and the Acura NSX. So pretty good company, pretty good benchmarks. I'm not sure what year this was in, but clearly it was in the C7 era, which we're still in, I guess, technically. And he said that the C7 Z06 and the Z51 Stingray just smoked them, referring to all those other mid-engine cars. And of course he mentioned the weight distribution because that's what is important about a mid-engine car. In fact, one of the things, we're gonna get into the other things in just a second. And he says that he thinks the Corvette will be about 35 front, 65 rear. Now my previous car was a Porsche Cayman S, and the weight distribution on that is about 46-54, so it's fairly close to 50-50. It's got a little bit more in the back. It's not quite like the rear engine 911, which isn't exactly rear engine anymore. It's kind of mid-engine too. But for comparison purposes, the 2020 911, the Carrera S, is about 39-61. So Jim thinks that the weight distribution is going to be similar to the 911. Not quite sure on that. Obviously, you know, I don't really know. I've got no basis of comparison or anything, but that's what he's stating. Oh, and by the way, I've got a Discord chat if you want to join. It's like a community of car people that really like to chat about cars. It's like a live chat, except it's got different channels and stuff, so you can chat about the Corvette, the Tesla, the Supra, whatever. Links down below. It's a super cool community, by the way. It's growing every day. So again, I haven't listened to the podcast, and I'm not sure if Jim thinks that the weight distribution is a positive or a negative. My sense is that he is a traditionalist. He's kind of a purist, a front engine, rear wheel drive kind of guy. Clearly he's a very fast driver. That's what he's used to. And I can also say from my personal experience taking my Cayman S on track and also just driving the canyons that you do need to adapt your driving style a little bit to the mid-engine format. It just handles a little bit differently, and there's really no way you can explain it all day long, but until you get in and actually drive one under dynamic cornering conditions and applying power and so forth in corners, it just, you know, it can't really explain it. It feels kind of different. Now, there's definitely some dynamic advantages to having a mid-engine layout, and I think obviously this is one of the main reasons why Chevy decided to go mid-engine with the car. I think the other big one, which I discussed in a previous video, really has to do with marketing and sales on who the car is appealing to. Right now, Chevrolet has a problem, I'm gonna call it a problem, with the age demographic for the car. The median buyer for the Corvette right now is about 61 years old. Now that's pretty old, and I'm not disparaging anyone who's 61 years old, far from it, but the reality is that people that are in their 60s, and there's a lot of buyers even in their 70s, this might be their last Corvette because you've got issues with mobility, and obviously if you're retired, your income is likely to go down. So Corvette is really trying to appeal to a younger demographic of younger owners. They say they're doing this every generation and they keep failing at it. We'll see in about 2 years how successful they are. Back to the dynamics of why I think that a mid-engine format is a really, really good format is when you accelerate from a standing start, the weight shifts back over the rear wheels, providing additional traction. I think that's pretty obvious. The benefits there, better acceleration. Look at the 911. The 911 accelerates really, really hard because all the weight moves back over the tires. Now, the second thing is closely related, and that is the ability to put power down coming out of a corner. Again, if you're at a racetrack or you're in a canyon or something like that, when you start to apply the power, what you're really doing is you're controlling the weight, the way the weight moves around the chassis. And so when you apply power, the weight goes back and it goes over the rear wheels, providing you with additional traction coming out of a corner. At low speeds, not that big a deal, but when you're closer to the limits of adhesion, you're going to be able to apply power more effectively because the weight, again, is moving over the rear wheels. And just as a side note, when I took my Cayman out on track, I noticed I was able to get on the power a lot sooner than I was in my BMW 1M, which is a completely different car, completely different handling equation. But part of that is because of where the engine is placed. Now in braking, you've got a different situation where the weight is moving over the front wheels. And now because from a static position, you've got weight that is more towards the back. When you brake, you're going to move more weight to the front, and the tires are actually going to load up fairly equally compared to a front engine rear drive car. So you're going to have a little bit more braking performance too, at least in theory. And here's the big thing that is sort of difficult to explain. You really got to drive the car, but the initial turn in is a lot easier because there's less inertia. When you think about it, let's say you got a big heavy engine up front in a car. Let's say you got an iron block, something, whatever it is, and you think about turning that car, it's got inertia. The front of the car doesn't want to move because you got this big heavy engine to move first. You sort of got to get it going, and so that delays turn in. When you've got the engine right behind you and there's very little weight over the front wheels, turning in is really easy. It's so simple. It's just the car just wants to move quickly. Again, that's one of perhaps the most surprising thing about when I first started driving my Cayman was that there's just no weight over the front wheels and they just sort of bite. It's incredible. And so that's why I'm really surprised when Jim Mero said that he thinks one of the biggest problems with the mid-engine Corvette is going to be understeer. So personally, I don't really get that because, again, I'm just going to refer back to my Cayman because that's what I'm familiar with. Because there's less weight over the front wheels, I found there was very little understeer, certainly under normal driving dynamic conditions and even on the track. Now, Porsche builds in a little bit of understeer into their cars to alert the driver that you're sort of getting closer to the limits of adhesion. I think most manufacturers do that. It's a typical normal thing to essentially tell the driver that something is starting to happen with the car. You're sort of getting up to the limits of traction. So again, if you've ever driven a Cayman or a Boxster at normal speeds, you're gonna know that understeer is not too much of an issue. Now here's one thing that I'm gonna extrapolate from the article, again, not having heard the podcast, is that at the limits of adhesion, in the Cayman at least, you got a car that's pretty snappy. It is prone to snap oversteer, but you really got to get up to the limits. It's definitely a little trickier at the limits than a traditional front engine rear drive car. Now, of course, that depends on the car. Certainly, previous generations of Corvettes have been known for snap oversteer as well, but it's a little bit different when you have this big, heavy engine behind you as opposed to just roughly a 50-50 weight distribution. Now, I do expect that the Corvette's going to be significantly heavier than the last two generations of Cayman, which weighed respectively about 3,000 pounds and I think about 3,100 pounds for the 981. So that is going to make a little bit of a difference in the overall handling dynamics. However, here's my question to all of you out there. How much faith do you have in General Motors that this is going to be a good handling car? Certainly at normal sort of street speeds, not at the track. Now, General Motors has always marketed the Corvette as a good track car. So second question, how good is this going to be at the track? And how accessible and how approachable is the power and the handling going to be? That's sort of always an issue when you've got a higher horsepower car, when you got big, beefy tires. The cars with big tires are just, when you get up to the limits, they're going to be a little bit more prone to a dramatic breakaway as opposed to sort of sliding when you get to the limit. That is just sort of the nature of the big sticky tire world that we live in right now. Also, one more thing, of course, is that Corvette has pretty good traction control systems, pretty good dynamic stability systems, and I expect that most people are going to leave this on. And so I think certainly on the street, if you leave these systems on, it's going to be pretty easy to handle the car. And in fact, even in the C7, they had a pretty advanced traction control system for the track. And there was an article, I think it was in Motor Trend, that Randy Popst took I think it was a ZR1 or maybe it was a Z06 around Willow Springs in California with the traction control on and off, and found it significantly easier to drive. And I think maybe putting down even a similar track time to with the traction control off. I don't remember, but go ahead and correct me in the comments below. My Patreons are going to get early access to the Corvette video on July 19th. Patreon is a place where you can help support the channel, help me travel, help me go to events like the reveal and do videos, and basically turn this into more of a business. And I want to thank my super awesome Patreons, Real6, aka Epic God, $100 a month. Dude, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We've got a private chat coming up soon. David Bowder, Furious Grumble, $50, and Squirrel Pope at $20, and I got some others. They're all up on screen right now too. I got a couple of videos here up on screen. Go ahead and pick one. My name is Eric, don't you forget it, and I will see you in the next video, probably from the United Kingdom.